Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock. It is Saturday, July 10th, and this is the latest in another of Western Liberty Network's Saturday afternoon Zoom trainings. Western Liberty Network provides training live on site. We do these weekly Zoom trainings and we do periodic conferences, and these are free, and we invite everyone to participate. I'm going to share the screen here and I'll show you something. If you go to the westernlibertynetwork.org website, you will see this website. This is our homepage, and you see today's session advertised here on the screen, and you go down and you can see some of the things that Western Liberty Network has done through the years, and you can download some things and you can listen to some speeches. This one's particularly good. This was a speech at one of our conferences by Andrei Ilyaronov. He was Vladimir Putin's senior economic advisor before he defected to the United States. But we have a lot of really good materials here. We invite you to take a look.
Wow.
And if you would like to know more about our training, go to the training page, and that's here. We provide a variety of training online. We have these documents. We have training documents. I'm going to share one with you today, but you can download all of our training documents here. And these are designed to go with a live training, but they stand up on their own as well. So anything that interests you, you're able to download for free. And if you scroll down a little further, you will find recordings of previous Saturday Zoom sessions. It takes a little while for them to come up because I'm on satellite internet and my bandwidth isn't the fastest. But you'll see here by simply clicking on one of these things, you can view one of the previous trainings that we did. Michelle Binker has just joined us. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us. And she actually led one of our trainings not too long ago. I would also like to welcome Ken Morse. He is our volunteer Washington State Director. We're going to be doing a lot more activity in Washington. And if you decide that you want to help Western Liberty Network, you see value in what you see, we encourage you to support Western Liberty Network. And you can do that by clicking on our support tab. And you can make a one-time contribution or a monthly automatic contribution, and all of these things, of course, are tax deductible. Now I'm going to switch sharing. I'm going to upload a document through the chat window that we're going to be using today. This is one of the chat documents that is available for download free, and this is how to be effective in informal debates. And so we're going to share that. So I'm going to turn off the screen sharing. Let's see here, stop share, and come back on to back online. And I'll go through a couple of really quick things. One is I want to point out, excuse me, that Western Liberty Network is a 501c3 organization. Therefore, we do not endorse any candidate, political party, legislation, or ballot measure. We don't even endorse the candidates we train, but the affiliates of our organization are free to do so, and they sometimes do. So anything that anyone says here is their own responsibility and doesn't necessarily reflect the view of Western Liberty Network. Now, so with that, I'm going to upload a file. And here on our desktop, you can download this at any time that it's convenient for you and follow along with what we're doing today, or you can download it and read it later. Anyway, this session is how to be effective in informal debates. And what we mean by informal debates in this instance is any discussion you might be having with someone. It might be a radio interview. It might be a speech at a diner where you're talking to somebody that you're having lunch with. It might be at a Thanksgiving Day dinner when you talk politics with your Uncle Fred. Or it could be any other sort of thing when you're talking with a voter, going back and forth. And this is going to help you to be more effective and hopefully not alienate the people that you're talking to. And if you want to ask questions or make comments, please feel free to interact with me, interrupt. I love interactive sessions. So if you have questions, don't hesitate. Now, the first thing that we advise people to do is identify your audience. A lot of times when folks are engaging in an informal debate, they believe the audience is the person that they're talking to. For example, if I'm at a diner and I'm having a discussion with, GW down there, it's very natural to think that GW is my audience or who I'm speaking to. Or if I'm being interviewed by a radio person for the news, or if I'm calling into Lars Larson on First Amendment Friday, it's easy to think that Lars is the person that I'm talking to. But that's usually not the case. Usually, if you are testifying at a public meeting, for example, your audience may be the commissioners that you're testifying in front of, but the audience may also be the people who are watching the public access television program. If you're talking to a reporter, a lot of people try to make the mistake of convincing or talking to the reporter, but the audience is not the reporter. The audience are the readers of the article that the reporter writes. If you are at Thanksgiving Day table and you're talking politics with Uncle Fred's probably not your audience. Your audience is probably the rest of the people assembled around the table. And so if you want to be persuasive, it is not always important for you to convince the actual person that you're talking to. Yes, that's good, and that person is, of course, obviously a part of your audience, but your audience is usually a much larger body unless you're alone. And being aware of your audience, if your opponent is not aware of the audience, is one way to have a good head start in being effective when you debate. The second thing that I always convince people to do is to always, always, always be nice, no matter what. You might have the facts on your side, but that doesn't mean you're going to win the debate. I don't know if anyone here has ever sold anything before, like a car or a stereo, but most people are creatures of emotion. You can say, this car over here has great mileage, has a great maintenance record, lasts a long time, the engine never dies. But a lot of times they'll say, yeah, I know, but I like the red one. I like the Jeep. People are mostly creatures of emotion. And you'll find that in politics, you've got, your hard right and you've got your hard left. It's going to be hard to persuade very many people on the hard left. It's, the people who are on the hard right, if you're a conservative, are probably already on your side. It's going to be the people in the middle that are going to be the ones that you want to persuade if you're going to carry the day. And they're going to make their decision somewhat on the facts and on their interest. But many times, for people who are not regularly engaged in politics, the winner is the one that doesn't look like a jerk. You ever notice if you go to small claims court, having the facts on your side is helpful and very important and vital, but most of the time, the judge has a huge docket. They've got to go through these cases, and the one who wins is usually the one that the judge thinks is not the jerk. The one who's the jerk often loses, even if they are technically right. And so it is important for you to be nice. A lot of folks, if you're like me, you've probably had a moment when you got very passionate about something you're debating about, and you said, darn it, how can you be so stupid? How can you not understand? It's real easy to fall into that trap. I think maybe we all have done that. Has anyone not done that before, gotten excited? And it's really important when you're debating or discussing, never to do that. To always be polite, to bite your tongue, always be smiling, be the happy warrior. Let the person on the other side lose their temper. Let the other person be the one that calls you stupid and accuses you of these sorts of things. If you do that, no matter what the issue is, even if the facts aren't always on your side, it's going to make them the jerk, and you're going to be the nice guy. And people are going to be sympathetic to you who are in your audience. And if they're sympathetic to you, they're going to want you to be successful. They're going to want you to be able to persuade them. They will lower barriers, and you will come off as gracious, and you will come off as authentic. And as they lower barriers, you'll be able to reach them with your arguments, whatever the arguments are. Another thing that I try to encourage people to do is remember that their opponent is not usually their enemy. If you're a libertarian like me, or if you're a conservative, and you take a look at people like Harry Reid and maybe Nancy Pelosi and people like that who are out for power, I think you can argue that this is evil. And I'm sure there are people in every ideological camp that fall under that camp, that they want power and they're trying to aggrandize themselves. But the vast majority of people that we argue with are not that way. You can say that they're wrong, or you can say that they're misled, but they're almost never evil. They're almost never bad. You know, you can say that they are wrong and that they're misled and that they don't understand the facts, but they are not evil. And if you remember that, you can remember that they are not your enemy. They may be your opponent, but they're not your enemy. And if you can remember that, you know, like Uncle Fred is probably not your enemy at the Thanksgiving Day table. But if you can remember that, it makes it much, much easier to be nice. And if you are nice when you debate, you know, that is incredible. One thing that I saw a person do once is he got into a debate with a lefty, and the lefty started getting very, very, very upset. And the conservative in the discussion said, you know what, let's stop. You know, I know we have different views and we're passionate about them, but I really didn't want to upset you. I really didn't want to upset you. Let's cool down and maybe have coffee next week and pick this up again. And let's remember that, you know, we're both good people and we're not enemies. If your audience hears you say that, you are going to get major, major points for authenticity. You're going to get points for grace. And you're going to walk away from that discussion the winner, you know, even if you are not as strong on the facts as you would like to be. So I oftentimes spend a lot of time on that. Be nice, be authentic, be gracious, and remember your opponent is almost never actually your enemy, and treat them as someone who is not your enemy, even if they're the opponent. Are there any questions so far? Anybody have any questions or comments thus far? Okay, is this helpful at all?
I think you're making. Yes, it is. I think back, excuse me, to the Trump Biden debate.
Mm-hmm.
I fully agreed with the things that Trump stood for and said, but his demeanor during the debate was so turning off, not necessarily to me, but to the people around me. And so you're so right with being nice and rational, and yes.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about the first debate, right? The first presidential debate?
Yeah, the first one, there was one that was awful.
Yeah. And the second one, it was much better from his perspective, but that's a very good example. And I may use that in future iterations of this training as an example of that. I see your video came on.
No,
go ahead, Ellen.
I am just going to say you are making, I didn't know what to expect today. And so far you're making some very, very good points for the lay people around me and us. And you know, we're not.
Hold on a second. My wife just came in. She's the boss. Yes, Natasha, I'm on training. Okay, yeah, she's afraid I missed the training. Okay, so I saw that your video came on.
Thank you.
Ken. Yes, Ellen. Did you have a comment, Ken?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. Yeah, just I'm involved in a local political party, and it's who you talk to, who you perceive your audience to be is very important. If you're trying to convince, what I found, if you're trying to convince in our instance, a county chairman who is out for political power, very definitely, you're not going to convince that person. So I try to gear my my comments to be reasonable and supportable by the central committee, which is the larger body, the larger audience. So I gear everything I do for the larger audience. So when I set out a written communication, I really tend to be don't be accusatory. They're doing that enough that, so I don't need to add to that. It's kind of funny, but it really works to have a reasonable, calm approach that other people can, and we've been able in some of our meetings to really sway the whole meeting and take the meeting away from the person who wants control. We're able to step past that and garner the support that we need to be able to win the debate and win the vote. So really helpful.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add before we continue? Okay, then I'll continue. The next point we have in the training is, remember that you do not have to know everything. It is very common when a person is in a debate or a discussion, if they are asked a question they don't know the answer to, or if they are brought to some ground that they're not familiar with, it's really easy for them to try and fake it, pretend they know the answer, and not know the answer. And that usually does a lot. People can almost always tell. And you can do a lot to destroy your credibility by trying to bluster your way through a difficult time. In the long run, you will gain credibility and respect, and you will have weight added to your arguments if you simply say, you know what? I hadn't thought of that before. I don't know the answer to that. Let me think about it and get back to you with a thoughtful response. And it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'll find out and I'll get back to you. And then go ahead, make sure that you do follow through and you follow up and you get back to them. But if you don't know something or you don't know the answer to something, it is really important that you acknowledge that. Now, in a debate, if it's a key fact that you should know but don't know, it might cost you some persuasion points during that discussion. But you will gain credibility with your audience the next time you come through, because you will have the reputation as someone who does not BS your way through. You will come across as authentic. You will come across as very persuasive. And when you say something, your voice is going to carry weight and you will build your reputation. So don't be afraid if you don't know the answer, even if it seems embarrassing, to acknowledge that you don't know something, but be very quick to say that you will fix that defect and that you will get back to them with a thoughtful response. And if your objective is to seek the truth in an issue, be open to the possibility that your opponent might have a legitimate point. You know, you can say, you know what, I still believe that I'm right overall and that you're wrong overall, but you make some legitimate points. And we need to address those points, or my argument needs to incorporate the points that you brought up. If they bring up legitimate points, it's perfectly okay to acknowledge that. And again, this is going to propel you, in some cases, depending on who your audience is, to a leadership position, because if you are able to make that leap, you will be someone who is seen to be able to reach across, gulfs in people's understanding. You'll be able to be seen as somebody who can bring people together, who acknowledges the value of what everyone brings to the table. So, be authentic. People are starving for authenticity these days, and people are starving for genuine people who are trying to actually solve a problem. The news is full of people who are just wanting to score points off each other, and we see this in politics all the time, but people know what's happening. People expect it. People watch it like a sport. But if you want to actually solve problems, then actually solve problems and be honest about what you know and what you don't know when you argue and when you debate. The next point I'd like to raise is actually something I learned from the Libertarian Party. It's a technique called the Ransberger pivot. And it basically involves two things. On my sheet there, I have look for common ground, but the way this actually works is step one, if you're debating a topic, find a common outcome that you agree with. For example, if you're debating education, you might reach out to your opponent and say, look, I know we have differences, but I think we both want the same outcome. We both want people to emerge from our school systems, able to read, write, do math, and participate constructively in our society and our economy. Would you agree with that? Okay. Most of the time they will agree. Okay. If you're talking about healthcare, you can say, look, I want the same thing that you do, in the abstract. We all want people to have access to affordable quality healthcare that will not break them and provide solutions for people. Do you agree? And usually you'll get your opponent to agree with that. And so that's the first thing you do. You try to get your opponent to agree with you on a set of outcomes. Once you do that, then you execute the Ransberger pivot. You say, okay, this is good. We now have a benchmark to determine, what is the better way. We have a benchmark that we have agreed on. What will produce the most educated students coming out of our schools? Let's compare our two systems and see how they do in producing that outcome. And usually, limited government solutions, if you know your stuff, will provide a better solution. If you're talking about school choice, you can say schools will perform better if they have to compete for kids. Kids will perform better if they're placed in a school that is more closely matched to their learning style. Parents will be more engaged with schools if they have a say in the direction of their children's education. Whatever your arguments are, you will be able to talk about the system that you're supporting or the policy position that you're supporting, and you'll be able to say, and maybe you'll have a few examples based on what happened in Milwaukee or with this school system or that school system. They realized these improvements. Kansas City, the judge once ordered them to almost double per student spending, didn't work. You're able to show that the two systems side by side are unequal in the ability to achieve the outcomes that you have agreed upon. And sometimes what your opponent will do at that point, if they feel like they're in trouble, they'll try to slide and change it. Yes, but it doesn't provide as much equity in outcome. And then you're going to say, whoa, wait a minute, you're changing the parameters. You and I already agreed that for the purposes of this debate, the better system is that which achieves the outcomes we agreed upon. And if they continue to slide and try to evade that by putting new paradigms in, then your audience will detect that. And that will be a sign that they don't have any more ammo, and it will make it look like you won the debate. And while this is happening, be nice. And if they lose their temper and get into a huff, then they lose even more credibility in terms of persuading. And another thing you can say is, oh, you're adding new parameters to the debate. Well, I'm happy to debate you another time on these parameters, but we've already agreed on these outcomes for this debate. So let's take on that part of the debate now. So there are things that you can do to sort of, I guess the tactically mean way to say it is box your opponent in with their own parameters by getting them to agree to certain outcomes. Does that make sense to folks? Or I should say, if that doesn't make sense, let me know. Okay. The next point is related to that. And that is frame the debate. As you're debating, you need to frame the debate according to the issue that is most important to you. A lot of people get lost when I talk about framing the debate. What do I mean by framing the debate? Well, my favorite example that I like to use when I'm doing this training is to consider the question whether or not candy is good. Okay, let's say we have a debate. Candy is good. On one side, we have a person arguing, yes, candy is good. He or she is the president of Hershey Corporation, manufacturers of chocolate. And they will argue, yes, of course, candy is good. It makes children smile. It brings them delight. Lovers exchange candy as a romantic gesture. It's sweet, and you don't want to live on it, but in moderation, candy enriches our lives because it brings us happiness. Happiness is the main reason why you should agree with me that candy is good. So they have framed the debate in terms of happiness. Okay. On the other side is the president of the American Dental Association. And they will say, I understand, Mrs. Hershey's points, but candy causes a lot of problems. It causes diabetes, it shortens lives, it causes tooth decay, and that causes a range of other problems. And so candy is not good, and you should consider health as the primary reason as to how you would vote on whether or not candy is good. So they've tried to frame it in terms of health, okay? So when you are debating a topic, whatever it is, you're going to want to think about the central principle, the central value that you are representing. And you're going to want to present that as a value. You might want to say, freedom is the value that you are advocating if it comes to something like whether or not public school choice is a good idea, whether a voucher program is a good idea. Your opponent might use equity of outcome as a primary value. You will use freedom of choice and tie your arguments to the idea of freedom. Okay, if you're debating gun control or you're debating healthcare or whatever the issue is that you care about, think about what the primary value is that you're debating. Because if you have a primary value that you're pushing and you tell your audience what your primary value is, then your arguments are going to be well grounded. And even if you're not the most organized person in the world, like me, then your arguments will weave themselves together in a coherent narrative because they will all be tied to whatever your primary principle is. If you are not arguing according to a primary principle and you're just throwing statistics out there, it's just going to look like your argument has no cohesion and that you're just splaying all over the place. So if you can frame the debate according to a central value that you hold, for example, healthcare, your value might be healthcare quality. Your opponent might be healthcare outcome equity, okay? And you might be one of those who ultimately says, look, we've got two values here, healthcare quality or healthcare equity. If you've got cancer, which one are you going to want? Are you going to be willing to sacrifice 5 years of your life for the sake of the cause of equity of outcome? Or do you want the best medical care you can get and live those extra 5 years and spend time with your grandkids? Tie your arguments to a principle, and it's going to be very hard for your opponent to refute you, especially if they have failed to anchor their arguments in a defensible principle. Okay, is everybody okay with the concept of framing the debate? Okay, give some thought too about an issue you care about. I'm sure some people care about pro-life, pro-choice. You might care about First Amendment issues, public safety, whatever they are. Any issue that lights you up, think about what the core issue is. Think about that with respect to several issues and refer to those when you debate them at your next outing. The seventh point I make is put your best arguments first. Last night I provided training in Newburgh, and one of the participants was a school board member who was also a baseball coach. And in baseball, you have a lineup of your hitters. And a lot of times what a coach will try to do is put a decent hitter first, a decent hitter second, a decent hitter third, but they're a real strong hitter fourth, cleanup, in hopes that you've got some people on base and then that person will hit a home run or a triple and score multiple runs. So you put your strongest one fourth. And folks are sometimes inclined to argue that way. They'll say, I've got several arguments here. I'm going to put this one, this one, this one, and then I'm going to really nail them with this one. Okay. First, I wouldn't use that nomenclature because our objective isn't to nail people, but our objective is to persuade people. And I sometimes do that. I'm a competitive debater from high school and college, so I sometimes, get a little, blood out of the corners of my mouth too when I'm debating, and I have to curb myself in those situations. But don't make that mistake. If you put your best arguments third or fourth, you might not get to it. You might run out of time. If you're on the radio, your interviewer might run out of time and cut you off or interrupt you. Or people listening in the car will get to where they're going and they'll turn off the car and they won't listen to you anymore. Put your best arguments first. When it comes to writing newspaper articles, they have a saying, don't bury the lead. You've probably heard of that. You want to lead off with your strongest arguments first, then your next strongest argument second, your next strongest argument third, and so on and so forth. So if you have time to prepare for a discussion, many of these informal discussions are impromptu, and you may not be thinking that way. But if you do know you're going to go into a discussion, think about your best arguments and try to put them in order according to the weight you think they carry or they will carry with the people that you're trying to persuade. And then the final point I try to make people understand is that when you're finished, thank your opponent. Thank your audience and for their time and their attention. When the discussion is over, you can say, something, I think we both made some interesting points. Maybe we don't agree, but I really appreciate your time debating me on this topic or having this discussion with me. I want to thank you for your time. And for the listeners out there or the people reading the newspaper or the people who are watching on public access television, whatever your circumstance is, say, I want to thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope this has been of, Glenn Young has just come in. Okay, Glenn Young. Hi, Glenn. Welcome to the training. Glenn Young is a candidate running for City Council in Vancouver, and their primary is on August 3rd. And by the way, that's one of the reasons we're doing this topic right now, is because there are a lot of Washington candidates who are running for local nonpartisan office, just like we did in Oregon on May 18th. And I'm hoping that a number of them will see this recording and be able to apply what they're doing. So, so getting back to the number 8 point, thank your opponent and audience for their attention. If you do that at the end of the discussion, it's going to show you as a classy person. It's going to increase your credibility. It's also going to show that you have some grace. And people will extend that back to you, and they're going to be more willing to go back and think about what you said and say, something, they really made a good point on this. I remember what they said on this. They're going to want to like you. Again, for most people, particularly in the middle, in the political middle, it's not going to be the issues. It's going to be likability, relatability. If you remember when Bill Clinton got elected, a lot of people voted for him, not because they agreed with him on the issues, but because the polls said that Bill Clinton understands the problems of people like me. That's why a lot of people voted for them. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan was elected president of the United States, they voted for him because they liked him. They liked his confidence, his demeanor, his ability to be a happy warrior. And the polls showed that the majority of Americans didn't agree with him on a lot of issues, but they voted for him because they liked him. So remember that the right and the left are going to be polarized, but the middle is going to be your audience. They're going to be the ones that you want to be persuaded by, or you want to persuade. So be likable to them, and you can do that at the end by thanking them for their time, thanking them for their attention, thanking your opponent for their audience. So I'm going to review this over and ask you to imagine. You notice we haven't really talked about a specific debate issue yet, and that's on purpose. Because, if you've ever read Sun Tzu's Art of War, they will tell you that most battles are won or lost before they're ever fought. And they're won or lost based on the environment the battlefield and so on and so forth. So this training is designed to help you establish the parameters of the battlefield that work for you the best. So let's start at the beginning for these points. I know Glenn came in late, so maybe this will help. Identify your audience. If you know who your audience actually is, not just the person you're actually talking to, and your opponent does not, already you're going to be more effective. And it's going to be more like you're speaking to the actual people that you want to persuade. They will feel like you're speaking to them. Always be nice, no matter what. Never lose your temper. Let your opponent lose their temper. If your opponent loses their temper, show some class, let them go on for a while, but then say, look, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. Let's come back and do this another time. And you will come across as the one who is under control, that has composure, that has some class. You're going to have credibility right off the bat. But never, never, never lose your temper, call the other side names or anything like that. Remember, your opponent is not your enemy. You know, very rarely is your opponent actually your enemy. They may be wrong, they may be misguided, they may not understand basics of the issues, but they're not evil. And I like to point out that I was once neighbors with an ardent leftist, but you know, he was a nice guy, had a nice family. We watched each other's houses when we went on weekend trips. We watched each other, fed each other's dogs, you know, watched each other's kids. In my case, I had a stepdaughter. You know, these are good people that we're facing off with most of the time. So if you remember that they're not your enemy, you're going to come across as more of a happy warrior that inspires people, and it's going to make it easier for you to always be nice. Remember, you don't have to know everything. It's okay to not know the answer. If you do not know the answer, or you get stuck on a point you hadn't thought of, just own it. Just say, look, I don't know the answer to that question. I'll find out and I'll get back to you. I hadn't thought of that before. That's an interesting idea. Let me think about it and get back to you. And then think about it and get back to them. And this is going to make you look thoughtful to your audience. Even there, you know, people are generally very forgiving. If you don't know the answer to a question, many times, even if it's a basic question you're expected to know the answer to, they will be very forgiving of you if you will own it and take charge of it and fix it and then get back to them or offer to get back to them. That's going to help you build credibility. Remember to look for common outcomes. If you have two policies that are in competition, get your opponent to agree on an outcome. Well, if it's transportation, it's like, you know, what we really need is for it to be easy for people in our town to be able to get where they need to as quickly as possible, with as little interference as possible. Do you agree with me on that? And if they agree with you on that, then you've got them, because then you can take your policies and show that your policies work better to achieve those outcomes than your opponent's policies. That's called the Ransberger pivot. It's a very effective debate technique. Frame the issue. And by frame the issue, I mean, when you are debating an issue, think about what the primary value is behind your argument, whether it's freedom, whether it's equity, no matter what it is, whether it's educational choice or defense of the Constitution, whatever your primary principle is, tie your arguments to that primary principle so they know exactly what you're standing for. If your opponent loses their cool, if your opponent doesn't know who their audience really is, if your opponent sees you as an enemy, it will show. If your opponent pretends to know everything and tries to bluster through something they don't know, it's going to make them look bad. If your opponent can't agree on common outcomes, it'll make it look like that they can't be satisfied by anything. And if they do agree on a common outcome and they compare their issues, they're trapped unless their issues are the best. If they're not debating according to a central value, then they're going to look just combobulated and splayed. And then put your best arguments first, and then finally show some grace by thanking them and thanking your audience for their time. Are there any questions here? Are there any comments? Does anyone have anything to say?
You've made great sense, truly.
Okay, well, I'm glad this has been helpful to you.
Very.
Yep. Let's see. So yes, Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to comment about the language you use sometimes. Being involved in a particular political party, There's kind of like two different, well, there's actually about 5 different parties within the party, different, these people and so forth. And it's really not helpful to look at an opponent as, well, they're a such and such, and we do a little name calling. And as gratifying as that may be, it's really unhelpful. It gets us into a mindset that looks at each other as enemies when we have actually much more in common. Now they have their own name calling, and but I'm tending to get away from any of the name calling because it poisons my thinking, and it affects my approach. It really, the language you use, especially even if it's language that you're not using in a meeting, you're using it behind the scenes. It colors everything that you do, and it comes through whether or not you want it. That what's been surprising, I've been working with a group within this particular party, and I've been trying to get them to see that, look at them as reluctant allies, someone you can convince. And at the last Central Committee meeting, we had a bunch of the people that normally we would name call, and they're a such and such, they're not with us, they're them, we're us. They came to our aid. We convinced them by our approach, which we'd been practicing, and we won the day. And we had a surprising number of people stand up and says, yeah, we should follow the bylaws. It's like, he's saying that. And it's because we weren't name calling, because we were changing how we look at each other, realizing we have more in common than not, that we're able to carry the issue. So
that's a really good point, Ken. Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of times when you go into a discussion or a debate, you want to ask yourself, what is my primary objective here? Is my primary objective to actually persuade people to my point of view? Or is my primary objective to give myself a dopamine hit and affirm my own beliefs? Or is my primary goal to cheese off the other side and get a dopamine hit from cheesing off the other side? You'd be surprised. People sometimes say they have one motive for engaging in a debate or a political conflict, but they actually have another one. And I see that a lot in third-party politics. People would sometimes much rather be affirmed than to be effective. And I think that for those who support limited government these days, with big government and authoritarianism on the march, we need to be wanting to persuade people, and we need to be wanting to be effective. And I'm not saying that following these guidelines, they're not going to guarantee you success. You do have to have some content. Remember that old ad phrase, where's the beef? You have to have some beef in your arguments. But I will tell you that if you follow these guidelines, you will be much more successful than you would be if you did not follow these guidelines. And there are other points too. I mean, this is something that you can have an entire semester class on if you want to expand it and work on it. But simply knowing these basics will make it much easier to be effective when you engage in debates. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to say for the good of the order today? Okay. Well, that being the case, now Michelle gives us a nice comment. She thanks us for these debate pointers. And Michelle, it's always good to have you on the call. Glenn, I know you showed up late. This is going to be on the training tab of the westernlibertynetwork.org website as soon as I get it downloaded and re-uploaded. So if you want to see the entire training, it'll be available to you free of cost off the training tab of the westernlibertynetwork.org website. I encourage everyone watching this recording to check out our website and look at the training resources we have on our training tab. And if you see value in what we're providing, make a tax-deductible contribution on the support tab. So with that, I'm going to close the discussion. And I want to wish everyone a wonderful weekend. Wish you all success. And if you want to contact me, the contact information is available on the website. So please contact me at your convenience. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Great information.
Thank you so much.